with everybody today on a rainy day in DC. So this webinar will focus on the forgiveness elements of the Paycheck Protection Program. And let's see if I can move my slides here. Okay, so I thought I would start out. I can't remember if I covered this earlier. I believe I did, but just a bit of an overview. So phase 3.5, the Paycheck Protection Program and Healthcare Enhancement Act, added an additional $310 billion to the PPP funding for funding. And they split it up a little bit differently this time, where $250 billion went to all financial institutions, $30 billion were allocated to those financial institutions with less than $10 billion in assets, 30 to those institutions with 10 to 50 billion in assets. And then they also included 50 billion for the EIDL loan funding program and another 10 billion for the EIDL emergency grant program. And then 75 billion for hospitals and 25 billion for testing. So that was the latest legislation that was passed by Congress and signed into law on Friday, last Friday. And the money was allocated and available to the SBA starting last Friday. And they opened the window back up for loan facilitation or processing through the SBA at 10:30 a.m. on Monday. So I just wanted to go over some updates of the two loan programs. The Economic Injury Disaster Loan, the program is essentially closed right now. They're not accepting any new applications, even though they were allocated or appropriated more money in this last round of funding. There are so many that are already applied to the program that they have suspended new applications. They have talked about how they might open it back up if funding allows, but it is anticipated that all of those new dollars will be allocated to those who have already applied, and even for the new allocation of money for the emergency grant program. We heard from, I can't remember who it was, but Congressman's office that the SBA believed that they can process most of the existing applicants in the next 2 weeks, which is a huge feat, getting those loans out the door, but that most will be disappointed with disbursements. So we had heard earlier that those applying later to the program were getting a notice saying that the first disbursement would be capped at $15,000, which is certainly a far cry from the millions of dollars that was the cap for previous. I believe the cap was $2 million. But now first time disbursements is $15,000. That may be why they're able to get the loans out the door quickly now. And the emergency grant again is $1,000 per employee up to $10,000. And the emergency grant has started hitting bank accounts of those small business owners who requested the emergency grant. If you've requested an emergency grant, you will likely not get a notice saying that you are getting it. It will just appear in your bank account and it will say EIDL advance or AVD or something like that. We've had a few of our members sending in a snapshot of what is in their bank account asking what it was. So as far as I know, that is kind of how it's going, how it's being deposited, and that there isn't kind of a notification beforehand. It's just being deposited. It might be the same way with the loan itself. But they are opening up the loan program temporarily because the they were allowed to accept farms as part of the application process. And because they need to facilitate some farm loans, because they were, they do qualify now for this loan program, they're opening the window for a little while, but I think it's only going to be for farms. So anybody else that tries to apply will likely, I'm suspecting, will likely have a, you know, no funds are available type of notice, because they do have millions in the pipeline waiting for a loan still. So I think the allocated money is going to disappear rapidly, unfortunately, for this program. And then moving to the Paycheck Protection Program, this program was allocated again about $310 billion. And as of 10:30 in the morning on Monday, the program was back up and running, and SBA, they were facilitating the loans again that were uploaded from the banks, and it had a rough start to begin with. Banks weren't able to upload or download, I can't remember which terminology is appropriate, but they weren't able to submit the files with loan applications. And so there was a bottleneck at the beginning of when they started the program up and running again on Monday. They smoothed that out, and now they are being processed quite rapidly. From last night, the latest is that about $90 billion of the $310 billion approved by Congress has now been allocated. So almost a third of the appropriated money from the supplemental legislation has already been allocated through this program. And we are assuming that it's probably going to, again, fund all of those who are in the pipeline that have already submitted their application, and not many more outside of that. So while there are still banks and financial institutions such as PayPal and I believe Cabbage, Intuit QuickBooks, that are still accepting applications, that window is likely to close fairly soon as they run through this money over the next week. We're thinking that that's probably the time frame in which the funding for this new supplemental part of this funding will run out. There's been a number of, I'm sure you've seen the media reports regarding the publicly traded companies giving back the loans, such as the LA Lakers, which I thought was more than interesting that they received one. But anyway, the media has done their job, that they have started returning these loans or declining them when they are approved and closing. So there was roughly about $2 billion in those loan dollars that had been returned or declined at closing, that are now back in the pool, ready to service more small business owners. So that is good news. Senator Rubio has said that for those businesses who are borrowing more than $2 million in this program, will likely be audited, or he said will be audited, as far as their need and use of this loan. So I just wanted to put that out there, that he did say that. And whether there's more funding, we don't know. We're certainly supporting and asking for more dollars to be allocated for this program. Most of it looks like more of the second package of funds going towards this program are going towards or going to those small business owners that the program was originally designed for. It certainly helps. Just a bit of update on the Main Street lending program through the Federal Reserve. They have lowered their lowered the minimum limits for those who want to borrow through that program. So initially you had to borrow at least $1 million. And so this program was designed for those businesses, medium-sized and the very large small businesses that were looking for a large loan to help them through the economic crisis. They have lowered that to $500,000. And so now it is available for those businesses looking for a loan of more than $500,000. It's a low interest loan. I believe it is, now I can't remember the interest rate on it, but I believe it's a 4-year term loan. And it's facilitated through the banks, and the Fed buys up, I believe it's 85% of the loan, and the banks hold the 15% of the loan. But if you're interested in a larger dollar amount, low interest loan, you might look to that program to see if that might be available to you. And I believe they allocated about $600 billion for that. So the Fed is in the lending business as far as reaching more businesses that are medium size and larger small businesses who need financial support that they might not otherwise be able to get. So for the forgiveness part of the Paycheck Protection Program, again, just a review of the parameters around this forgiveness program. When you receive your loan, the day that you receive the loan is when your 8-week forgiveness period starts. So for 8 weeks after you receive the loan, that's when you need to spend your loan dollars for qualifying or eligible forgivable expenses, and fitting all that within 8 weeks for forgiveness. So the eligible forgivable expenses include payroll costs, and that includes salary, wages, commissions, up to $100,000, paid leave, payment for group health insurance, insurance premiums, retirement benefits, and state and local taxes. It also includes the provision for owner compensation replacement, and I'll go over that in a few subsequent slides. It's a bit complicated, and or I guess it's not complicated, but it's a different way of looking at payroll for those small business owners who are not salaried employees. Also eligible expenses include interest on mortgage obligations, rent, and utilities. And interest on mortgage obligations, rent, and utilities, they all have had to been in place before February 15th. So no new utilities or no new rents or new interest on mortgage obligations. They all have had to have been in place before February 15th to be included as a forgivable expense. And under utilities, that includes electricity, gas, water, transportation, telephone, and internet service. Transportation, unfortunately, we have no idea what that includes. It could include a whole bunch of things, or it could include one thing. We don't know. We're still waiting for additional guidance on forgiveness with the SBA and Treasury. And I think I probably mentioned this last week, that we thought that this guidance would be available last week, and now we think it will be available this week, but it's already Thursday afternoon, so who knows. Hopefully they post it soon, because we certainly appreciate that there are many small business owners, many of you likely too, who are in their 8 weeks already and need some more guidance about how to spend these dollars and to make sure that they can receive the maximum loan forgiveness within those 8-week periods. So there are still many outstanding questions related to forgiveness on this part. And also rents. I mean, we're thinking that rent is, you know, the space of the business, renting the space of the business. But, you know, we don't know whether that also includes if you are renting equipment or trucks and cars under a lease contract or a leasing obligation, whether those are also included in rent. We don't know that part, unfortunately. Right now, we're being conservative in what rent means and that it is just the space for your business. But certainly looking for further guidance on that too. Okay, so owner compensation replacement, those owners who are not on payroll. For the self-employed and independent contractors, it is determined by net profits. So not a business draw, but looking at net profits, and you have had to have filed your 2019 taxes or prepared your 2019 taxes, and that will be on where it's reported is line 31 of the Schedule C. I had no idea that line 31 was net profits before this loan program, so I'm learning something new every day too. But it is line 31 of your Schedule C, net profits, and that's what you're looking at as far as determining the amount to calculate with regard to owner compensation replacement. If you haven't already prepared your 2019 return or you haven't filed, you just need to fill it out so you get to that number and can use that number in either applying for the loan or also in paying yourself, because that's how you calculate also how you would pay yourself with the loan funds. So, again, if you haven't already filed, you still need to fill it out on your Schedule C in order to qualify for the PPP. 1099 independent contractors are by default considered to be sole proprietors in the eyes of the IRS, and freelance income gets reported annually on a Schedule C within the personal tax returns. So Schedule C is what you're looking for. And then to calculate the amount for the loan to include in that payroll number for maximum loan amount, you would look at line 31, your net profits, up to $100,000, divide that by 12 to determine your average monthly net profit amount, and multiply that number by 2.5. So that would be the total amount that you would put in payroll for applying for the loan. And then as far as maximum replacement, what you can pay yourself under the scenario of owner compensation replacement, those who aren't on payroll, it is limited. So you can't take the whole thing. You can't take, you know, the 2.5 back and just pay yourself. You're limited to 8 weeks worth of that 2019 Schedule C net profit amount. So you go back to the Schedule C, line 31, and you divide it by 52, and you take 8 weeks of that amount, and that's what you can pay yourself back with the loan. And then the rest you can pay for other eligible expenses. Again, rent, utilities, interest on mortgage obligations. Those are the other expenses that you can use. And then if you don't have any more expenses to pay for, and you have money left over after the 8-week period, you can use that money. It will just remain a loan, and you can use it for the remaining amount or the term of the agreement, so up to a 2-year term. You can use it as a 1% loan, or you can prepay it back, and there's no penalty for prepaying. So you have 2 options after the 8 weeks. And there is a great resource. I have this up here, Bench consulting company. They have a whole list of how to calculate PPP loan amounts based on different legal structures of a business and different arrangements of, owner compensation. So if you have any questions, that's a good place to check out. NFIB isn't endorsing it certainly, but we are, I've used it and many of my coworkers have used it in trying to figure out some of the more complicated aspects of how owners are supposed to calculate either their replacement income or for the loan amount. So looking at maximum forgiveness amounts, there are a number of requirements that you need to follow to get maximum forgiveness. One is that the full-time employee equivalent. So if you don't maintain full-time employee equivalent, proportionately your forgiveness total is reduced in the average of full-time equivalent between pre-crisis levels and the 8-week forgiveness period. And I'll go over that in more detail in a second. And then there is the salary level. If you don't maintain at least 75% of pre-crisis salaries, then it's a straight reduction of payroll reduction. But presumably during that 8-week period, you are boosting salaries up to where they were before, at least to 75% of whether they were before, using those loan dollars for those who make under $100,000. If you don't maintain up to 75% of salaries from pre-crisis levels, then there is a reduction. And then, of course, there is the requirement that you spend all of those dollars within the 8-week window. If you spend outside of that 8-week window, it is just a 1% loan after that. And then one of the kind of biggest hurdles with this is that you need to spend at least 75% of those expenses on payroll. So the program is designed to help or to keep those employees connected to their job. And so 75% of those loan dollars have to be spent on payroll. They have to be spent on payroll within the 8 weeks. They also have to be spent on payroll for the duration of the loan. So any dollars you spend, 75% of those dollars have to be spent on payroll. So it's not if you have a $100,000 loan, you don't need, at least $75,000 to go to payroll and $25,000 to go to whatever. If you have a $2,000 loan or $200,000 loan and you only spend $100,000 of it, then at least 75 of that has to go to payroll, and you can use 25% for other expenses. So it's just looking at the total amount that you have spent of the loan, and that 75-25 rule applies within the 8 weeks and also outside the 8 weeks. And then there's the EIDL emergency grant that if you requested the grant, it's up to $10,000, and it will be subtracted from the forgiveness amount, and I'll go over that in more detail too. So the head count, the full-time equivalent employee head count, we still don't know how they're defining this. Hopefully SBA and Treasury, when they post guidance, will tell us what we're supposed to use as a full-time equivalent. We don't know whether it's 40 hours a week or 30 hours a week or somewhere in between, which is obviously very important to know these things. But you're looking at the full-time equivalent headcount within that 8-week forgiveness period, and then you compare it to either the time frame of February 15th, 2019 to June 30th, 2019, and you're looking at the average full-time equivalent employee count, or you can choose to look at January 1st to February 29th. And if you're seasonal, you would look at the January 1st to February 29th. But whatever makes more sense as far as equaling out those headcounts between that 8-week period or the 8-week period And either one of these periods, you use the one of your choice for that. And then if the 8-week period has fewer employees, full-time equivalent employees, if that number is lower than either one of these two, then your forgiveness amount will be reduced proportionately. If you're looking at wages, with respect to employees earning less than $100,000, again, the forgivable amount will be reduced if there's any reduction in wages during the 8-week period that exceeds 25%. So you at least have to maintain pre-crisis level wages of 75% or more. So there is a rehire exemption that will allow you for full forgiveness. And so it's a little strange because they look at different time frames from when you're calculating your full-time equivalent headcount. So the rehiring exemption, you're looking at if you reduced the number of employees after February 15th through April 26th, if you reduce the number of employees in that time frame, you are able to rehire, and it doesn't have to be the same people that you let go, but you are able to rehire to fill those positions by June 30th to restore that full-time equivalent headcount, and you comply with the terms and conditions of this forgiveness provision, and you can receive maximum forgiveness. So if you rehire by June 30th, which might be after your 8-week forgiveness period, so another confusing element to this, it would, certainly make sense for many, probably most, that you would rehire within that 8-week period, pay those folks with the loan dollars, and then after the 8-week period, if you need to readjust your headcount or number of employees, you would do that in week 9, but you would get back up to those full-time equivalent headcount levels within that 8-week period. But if you can't achieve it within that 8-week period, you do have until June 30th to do that, and to still get to where you need to be for to be able to maximize your forgiveness numbers. So just a reminder that there is this rehiring exemption. Again, you don't have to rehire the same people you laid off. You can rehire basically anybody. And if you don't have enough work because this is the situation for many people, if you don't have enough work for everybody, you can split up their hours. You can pay some, you can rotate them in, so they don't have to actually work the hours that they would normally work to receive those salaries or to be part of payroll. They could essentially, you could pay them not to work. The goal of this program is to keep employees connected to their job, and so any way that you're able to do that works under the provisions of this program, as long as you get those headcounts back up to pre-crisis levels and that the salary for that position remains similar to what it was. Okay, so calculating the forgiveness, loan forgiveness. So this is just kind of one example of what it might look like for somebody who doesn't have a lot of complications, which unfortunately isn't a whole lot of people. So this is just very straightforward, so you can just see what it looks like. So loan disbursement is $2 million. The average FTEs during the January 1st to February 29th was 192. The average FTEs during the 8-week after disbursement, maybe they lost a few people after February 15th. They had to rehire a few folks in the 8 weeks, but they got their numbers back up to 192. The covered payroll costs, because you have to use 75% of those expenses towards payroll, is they used $1,600,000 for those payroll costs. So they made it, they paid for at least 75% for payroll. The other 25% they use to cover rents, utilities, interest expenses, all those qualifying forgivable expenses in the other category. And the reduction in FTEs and wages were reinstated by June 30th, and then their loan was forgiven. What they couldn't have forgiven and what they still had to pay out of pocket was $122,400 for FICA and Medicare expenses. So those are not eligible expenses under the PPP loan. You would have to pay that out of pocket and not with loan dollars. The 8-week loan forgiveness and the EIDL emergency grant. So we've had a number of questions about this from our members, and not realizing that if you receive the grant and you have also forgivable eligible expenses within that 8 weeks, you can't benefit from both on top of each other. The emergency grant will be subtracted from the total amount of forgivable expenses, and that will be what is allowed to be forgiven from the PPP loan. So as an example, if you have $50,000 in eligible forgivable expenses in the PPP, and you also received a $10,000 EIDL grant, when you apply for forgiveness through your bank for the PPP loan, the bank will then subtract $10,000 from 50. You're left with $40,000 of eligible PPP forgiveness, and $10,000 will remain a 1% loan. So just so you have kind of a picture of what that might look like if you're in that situation. If you have an EIDL grant that's higher than the PPP forgivable expenses, still you would subtract $10,000 from the $8,000 of eligible expenses. It would just negate the whole thing. You'd be left with zero, and the $8,000 would remain a 1% loan. Some of the challenges in maintaining payroll rehiring, although 100% of the loan and principal and interest may be forgiven, that the full loan forgiveness has some challenging requirements. Not all payroll costs are eligible costs. Again, FICA is not included as an eligible cost. Employer paid leave amounts under the Families First are not eligible for payroll costs because you are able to get a refundable tax credit for those costs. And so those programs, I think I went over this before, those programs are separate and you can't pay for those leave costs. You have to be reimbursed through that program. And then payroll costs are wages and salaries up to $100,000. So if you have any employees that make over $100,000, you have to limit the amount that you're using from the loan to $100,000. And then there's the situation where employees might not want to come back to work, where we certainly heard from a number of our members saying that it's difficult. They're already on unemployment insurance, and they're not interested in coming back. So employers are competing against supplemental unemployment benefits. It's $600 a week, the supplemental, and it lasts until the end of July. And while every week somebody on unemployment insurance has to say, you know, that they have not received another offer, they have, you know, they don't have a job offer available, because of the number of those who are on unemployment or have filed jobless claims, which is now 30 million. Enforcement of that will probably be a bit lax. So it might be difficult to get up to those FTEE numbers. Again, though, you don't have to hire the same people back, even though many employers certainly want to, because you've spent time and resources in training those employees, former employees. They know your business. But even if it's difficult to get them back, you can hire other people to fill those positions, at least for the amount of time that's required for forgiveness. And then the documentation checklist for forgiveness, copies of the monthly payroll tax report filed with the IRS, payroll reports, payroll tax filings, form 941 and 940, copies of monthly payroll reports for each pay period within the 8 weeks, gross wages, including vacation, sick, and other PTO, documents reflecting health insurance premiums paid by the company under a group health plan, including owners of the company within the 8-week period. And then copies of monthly invoices, canceled checks, ACH drafts are acceptable. Documentation of all retirement plan benefits or plan funding by the employer within the 8 weeks, copies of all lease agreements, rents, copies of mortgage interest, copies of canceled checks and statements for those utility expenses that you might pay for. And your lender, the bank, might also require some additional information, but those are the general documents that that you should be prepared to bring to the bank when you apply for forgiveness at the end of the 8 weeks. And you don't have to apply, right after the 8 weeks, but when you do apply, you would go back to your bank, apply to have those expenses forgiven. You give them all your paperwork, and then they evaluate the paperwork and make sure that you're in compliance, and then they would approve those expenses that are in compliance. And if there are any that aren't in compliance, then that would just turn into the 1% loan for the 2-year or the rest of the term of the loan. And then additional notes, again, the lender, when you submit for the forgiveness part after the 8 weeks, the lender has 60 days to review and make a determination. So if the initial application that you're handing over documents, if they have any questions or need additional documentation, they have 60 days to go back and forth with you and to work it out. And then the SBA is scheduled to issue additional guidance. As I said, those guidance are hoping to be posted soon, as many people are in the 8 weeks. The FTEE definition, that's one of the areas that we're looking for. Penalties for non-compliance. We have no idea what the penalties are going to look like for non-compliance. Likely it will be that you won't qualify for forgiveness for kind of gross non-compliance of some of these provisions. For instance, using the loan for non-eligible expenses. That's probably the biggest one. And there will certainly be penalties for that, but we don't know what those are yet. And then the workforce and salary reductions, we need more clarification on that. And then details on qualifying expenses, especially utilities, what some of these terms mean and what can be included in, for instance, transportation. We just don't know, or telephone, if that's cell phones for employees, if that's, however broad the category is for telephone, we don't know, and what might be included in that. So those are the additional notes. And I am at the end. Hopefully I didn't confuse more people than offering the information, but certainly ask questions and hopefully I can clarify things, or if there's anything that I didn't cover as far as forgiveness or the loan programs in general. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Holly. Can you hear me okay?
I can, yes.
Okay, good. Have a few questions here. The first one from Mike. Is there a difference between full-time and part-time employees for the forgiveness? I've heard that you have to maintain the same number of full-time employees to have all the payroll amounts forgiven, regardless if you are closed. Is that true?
So that's where the full-time equivalent comes into play. So if you have a lot of part-time folks, then you would add up all those hours and kind of as far as calculation, you would convert them into a full-time equivalent, And then those levels would be compared to the 8 weeks of the forgiveness period. But we don't know yet what they're going to consider full-time and part-time as far as having to add up those hours. So whether it's 30 or 40 hours, if it's a full-time, if say, for instance, it's 30 hours and you have, 2 part-time employees who work 15 hours each, and you have 1 full-time employee who works 32 hours each, or 32 hours, the 1 full-time would count as 1, the 2 part-time, if you add up their hours, it would be 30, and that would be 1. So you'd have 2 full-time equivalent employees. We just don't know how to calculate that because we don't know the definition. Fingers crossed it comes soon.
Yeah, would you recommend they right now use the 30 because that would be the safer number?
It would be the easier number because more employees will likely fit as a full-time, and so you wouldn't have to calculate so many hours on the back end. That's the full-time equivalent. 30 hours is how they defined it in regard to the ACA, the healthcare law. And so maybe they'll just go with that because that's how people are thinking about it in terms of complying with big pieces of legislation. But, we don't know yet.
Okay. The next question from Carla. My payroll date fell 1 day after the date of my loan, but was funded the day before. Can I ignore the pay period, which was reduced hours, and use the pay period that falls the day after 8 weeks, but is funded the day before?
Yes, so this
would be higher.
Yeah, this is an area that, we've received so many questions about, do I need to fit like cutting checks and hours worked both within the 8-week period, or can part of it go outside? Can I adjust? As far as we know, you can adjust to make it all fit within the 8 weeks. If you can't do that, it's at least have the check cutting part be within the 8 weeks, the actual expense itself be in the 8 weeks. And hopefully SBA will offer some flexibility as far as hours worked if some of that ends up outside of those 8-week parameters. But payroll should absolutely be within those 8 weeks. And we'll see how they determine any flexibility that they're going to offer. But right now it is the most conservative answer to make sure that you achieve maximum forgiveness is having hours worked and the pay periods all be in the same 8 weeks, which is always a challenge, unfortunately.
Thank you. This one is coming from a few different viewers. They use a accrued payroll system. So would they be using the accrued payroll cost or the actual payroll paid in that 8 weeks period? I
don't know for sure. As I understand it, the actual paid, but I don't know. Hopefully
accrued is an obligation.
Yeah.
So it's an expense. The cash may not have left yet, but it's an expense they have to pay.
Yes, I think that I don't know. I don't know. I shouldn't even speculate. Sorry.
We'll get that answer and try to get back to our members with that one. Okay. This one I have a few here from Stuart. I think we just covered this one on the calculation of part-time, full-time.
Yep.
Can we pay out bonuses to use on our loan, and are they forgiven in the full amount if we pay them during the 8 weeks or 2.5 of the amount?
Yes, you are able to give bonuses to your employees. They'll be grateful, and that full amount can be forgiven. It needs to be less than, of course, the cap of compensation of $100,000. So make sure that it's under that cap. And, just as, to not have any red flags, don't hand out bonuses that are just completely out of proportion with their salaries, or if you've never given bonuses before, just be a little bit careful with the amount. We don't know what banks are going to look towards as far as what would cause red flags, but certainly bonuses. I mean, absolutely, you can give bonuses, and that is part of qualified forgivable expenses.
Okay. Are retirement plans considered part of the payroll cost? Contributions to retirement plans?
Yes, they are part of the payroll cost. So you can include retirement plan, what the employers pay.
And that's still how the entire amount can be included in that 8-week period?
Correct. Yes.
Okay, good. Can we pay both employees who are working and employees who are not working?
Yes. So if there are employees on payroll but not working, you can use those dollars, or you can, hire somebody and they're not working and pay them. You can certainly do that. They don't actually need to be working any number of hours. You can just pay them to sit on the couch.
This may vary by state, but can the employee elect not to return to work for any reason?
No, they can't. So this is one of those where if they have filed unemployment and they're collecting unemployment, they have to go back and file every week. Every week that they file, they're asked if they've received an offer or offered a job. And, I guess they could just say no, even if they have, because there are so many people who have filed that enforcement's going to be difficult. Some states have really cracked down on this over the last few weeks. So hopefully this doesn't turn into a big, huge mess until, the end of July, when the supplemental $600 a week program ends. But really, if they are offered a position, if they're offered a job, then they should technically be ineligible for unemployment insurance. Okay.
Can we reduce an employee's salary down to the $100,000 just for the 8 weeks in order not to have it reduced when asked for forgiveness?
So as far as the loan, yes, you can only pay somebody up to $100,000 with loan dollars for that forgiveness. So you'd have to reduce employees' salaries down to the cap as far as what you're paying them with the loan.
I think we've answered this one. As a sole proprietor, can I include my monthly health insurance in my expenses?
So as a sole proprietor, monthly health insurance benefits, I am actually not sure, because I feel like I've seen where owners with the replacement compensation, they can't include health insurance premiums in it, but I'd have to check with that. So
all right, we'll get back.
I'll dig in and
I'll get back to our listeners on this one, that question.
Yeah.
Is payroll calculations based on when it's paid or when it's accrued? I think we talked about that one. We'll owe them an answer on that.
Yeah.
Are utility calculations based on the date of the payment or the date during the 8-week period of utility service dates?
We don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, that's another one that's hopefully.
Okay, so that's the overall accrual question is what we need to get an answer for.
Yep.
Jumping for me here. If you are seasonal, and do you still have to annualize the chef's salary, weekly salary, when he is only paid 8 of the 12 months?
You're looking at the salary for the previous period, and I'll send you, Ronnie, a fact sheet of forgiveness that we put together that has what the time frame of a previous period is. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but you're looking at average salary through the 8 weeks and comparing it to salary over a previous period. And I can't remember what the previous period is.
Okay, we'll get that to our members. If I missed a federal payroll tax, can be used in the PPP program?
No, federal tax, payroll taxes cannot be used in the loan program. You cannot use the loan to pay those expenses.
Okay, my loan will be, let me get this. My loan will be dispersed May 7th. Will my 8 weeks run into the first week of July, or does it go to the 30th June?
No, so it will run into July. You can actually, I mean, if there were funds available, you could receive a loan June 20th, and that 8 weeks would start June 20th and go 8 weeks forward into, I guess, August at that point. And, you still have that 8 weeks. You just wouldn't have any buffer on the end of the 8 weeks if you still hadn't increased your full-time equivalent. If that was a challenge, you'd have to do it all within the 8 weeks. But no, you still get the 8 weeks.
Okay. We have received our PPP and decided to pay our employees their average hours they work from January 1st through March 14th without them currently working. Is this legal?
Yes, you can pay. It is designed so you can pay employees even if they have nothing to do.
Okay. Got that one. Will the forgiveness amount granted have to be claimed as business income for 2020 tax returns?
No, that is another one of the benefits of this loan program as far as forgiveness. All expenses forgiven, you don't have to pay taxes on, federal taxes. Some states are talking about how they would like to make borrowers, even the forgivable part or the forgiveness part, taxes. Of course, like Illinois has talked about this a little bit, but I don't know how much traction that's going to get. But no, you don't have to pay federal taxes on those loan amounts that are forgiven.
And to confirm, the 8 week period begins when the loan has been deposited.
Correct.
Deposit date?
Yes. When the loan hits your bank account is when the 8 weeks start.
Okay. I think that's all we have. I have the others. I think we've covered them in the presentation. So thank you, Holly. I appreciate your time you've given us, and we'll be getting back with you to make sure we were able to answer these outstanding questions for our members. But again, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
And, we look forward to talking to you soon. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.